Good afternoon, and welcome to the Minnesotan folks that are joining me here today in my library. It is good to have you with me. It is always good for friends of like mind who love our history to come together and reason one with the other. Today, though, you catch me having to leave shortly to go to attend to matters at the War Department. But before I do, and by no means hurriedly, I should like to reflect with you a bit about Vicksburg, the surrender, and the parole of Pemberton's army, and a bit of a glance northward to that little village in Pennsylvania, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, that was fought at the same time the culmination of the Vicksburg campaign was occurring. On July 3rd, the morning of July 3rd, Pemberton approached me via messenger at about 10 a.m. Proposing terms for surrender. And in the next 24 hours, we negotiated a surrender agreement. It happened after a 47-day siege. It all took place and wrapped up in 24 hours. And in that agreement, I decided to parole Pemberton's army, some 30,500, 31,000 men. And rather than send them to prison camps, I wanted to parole them. And my thinking was thus, Admiral Porter had told me if I wanted to send the men north to a prison camp, which the exchange point for Confederate prisoners was it's Aiken's Landing near Dutch Gap, Virginia. So all of Pemberton's men would have to be 30,000 of them, and about half of them ill to very ill, and that they would have to be cared for in transit up to Aiken, Virginia, near Dutch Gap. And the Confederate exchange point, now this is according to the Dix Hill Agreement from June of 62, that we would exchange. Confederates would be, or Federals would be exchanged in Aiken's Point, Aiken's Landing, and Confederates at Vicksburg. But they had to go north to be exchanged soldier for soldier. And we had more Confederate prisoners than they had Federal prisoners. So the two problems I had were, one, the length of time, estimated 4 to 6 months, to get the Confederate prisoners up to Aiken's Landing. The second problem was that we had less Confederate prisoners than they had Federal. So the man-for-man exchange would take all of the Federal prisoners that we had to get back. And after that, the remaining Confederates, thousands of them, would be paroled and sent back home. That meant that they would either have to be transported back to Vicksburg or simply released at Aiken's Landing and walk that several hundred miles back to their various homes in the area, the region around Vicksburg. Well, I had a war to win, and I wasn't about to go into garrison duty for 6 months. Moreover, I did not want to get into that difficulty of sending prisoners to Aiken's Landing and then paroling most of them, or if not many of them, most of them, only to have them come back and I think to get back into the fight. So my decision was to parole them because I felt that most of them were indeed from the region around Vicksburg. And when they got that parole paper, they would be able to go back to their several homes. And I thought they would stay there because they'd seen the elephant. They could, with pride, be able to stay in their homes, not get back in the fight. And if they were indeed ever questioned about their courage or their patriotism for the South, the so-called Confederacy, they could hold up that parole form and say, I was with Pemberton. I've done my duty. I fought those battles, the 5 battles of the Vicksburg campaign. I was in Vicksburg for 47 days under that siege. I've done my part. And when they want me back, I'm exchanged, they can call me back. Now, I thought that that's what they would do. However, after we paroled 30,000 men, most of them did indeed go back to their homes, but many of them, again, an intentional vagary, I do not know the specifics, but many of them got back into Confederate military service almost immediately. In fact, we took many prisoners at Chattanooga and Lookout Mountain that had been paroled at Vicksburg. Also, the Confederate authorities said they cried foul and contended that there were many irregularities with how we had paroled the prisoners. So the parole did not legitimately or legally fit. So their men were therefore free to re-enter Confederate service. That did not surprise me. I was, however, surprised that so many of them did actually get back into the fight. I was glad of the surrender being what it was. Happy with it. It was anything but unconditional, and the cost was steep. We had about 10,000 casualties in the 5 battles we fought in pushing Pemberton into Vicksburg. And then the 2 assaults, May 19th, May 22nd, which were bloodily repulsive. In fact, the May 22nd assault to try to break into Vicksburg is one of the 2 decisions I made in the war that I regret having ever issued the order. The other was the attack at Cold Harbor. We had about 10,000 casualties. The Confederates had 30,000 men taken prisoner and several thousand casualties in those fights. So the cost was steep for both sides, but the victory for the Union was more than worth it in opening the Mississippi from source to mouth. And we split the Confederacy in half, and it truly was a death knell for the Confederacy. I'd like to also point out that there is a great deal of contention about the significance of the Battle of Gettysburg as opposed to the Battle of Vicksburg. I should like to submit for your consideration that while I do not diminish or demean in any way what happened at Gettysburg, it was the biggest battle of the war. There were 50,000 casualties, and of those 50,000, 7,000 or thereabouts were dead on the field, which does not count how many more men died of mortal wounds received in the battle. It was hell come to earth. It was Armageddon. Well, you'll have to pardon me. I was temporarily called away. Even here in the library, I still have duties and requirements that require my attention. My apologies. Hopefully, it won't happen again. But I should like to pick up about Minnesotans taking part in the Battle of Gettysburg. There were 2 of this new medal, the Medal of Honor, which is by decree of Congress the highest award for above and beyond the call of duty for someone in the Army or the Navy. And Minnesota, as I understand, was 2 Minnesotans were awarded, and a caution, one does not win the Medal of Honor, one is awarded by congressional decision the Medal of Honor. But there were 2 Minnesotans, I understand, that were awarded the Medal of Honor. One for grabbing a battle flag in combat from a North Carolina unit, and another Minnesotan grabbed his own regiment flag when the color bearer was killed before it hit the ground, and roaring led a charge there during, as I recall, having heard, it was Pickett's charge. And this soldier, brave lad, led a charge against the troops coming at them at the stone wall, and they were repulsed. So there were two Minnesotans that received the medal, awarded the Medal of Honor at Gettysburg. In Vicksburg, a Minnesota regiment was one of the very first, might have been the first regiment in town for distinguished service during the campaign of the five battles and then the siege. Minnesotans claim to be the first ones to raise the flag, the United States flag, over Vicksburg, over the courthouse. Now, a Michigan regiment also claims that honor because indeed they were, unbeknownst to each to the other, the Michigan regiment was in another part of downtown Vicksburg, and I believe they raised the U.S. flag over the post office, but I'm not sure. But Minnesotans were among the first to come into Vicksburg as an honor for their service during the campaign and siege, and Minnesotans distinguished themselves at Gettysburg. Now, the controversy between the significance of Gettysburg versus the significance of Vicksburg is such that I would say I do not demean the service of those soldiers on either side in the Battle of Gettysburg. It was the largest battle of the war, 50,000 casualties. I understand 7,000 dead on the field. But strategically, it was not significant. Realistically, Lee lost thousands of soldiers through dead and wounded that he could not replace. So it significantly weakened the Army in Northern Virginia. And indeed, they were unable to ever again mount an offensive movement because of the losses at Gettysburg. That's important. But Gettysburg was not of great strategic significance. It was Armageddon, and therein is a significant part of the difference between the coverage between Gettysburg and Vicksburg. With the victory at Vicksburg, the Mississippi was open from source to mouth. Commerce was resumed. A significant portion of the Trans-Mississippi of the Confederacy was sheared away. It said the Confederacy was cut in half. There was another army, a second army, completely taken out of the field. The one at Fort Donelson, 30,000 more men. At Vicksburg, the Confederacy lost 18% of their total artillery, and they never recovered from that loss. So Vicksburg was strategically greatly more the significant battle between Vicksburg and Gettysburg. However, Gettysburg had the great Robert E. Lee, and the newspapers of the South and most of those of the North, where Lee went, they also went. The headlines were always bigger and more blaring in the East than in the Western theater. And the Battle of Gettysburg, the campaign and resulting battle, and the aftermath received greatly more coverage than Vicksburg did. Also, Vicksburg ended with a whisper. There were 5 battles when we first crossed the Mississippi, April 30th, May 1st, the largest amphibious military operation in history, taking 22,000 men across the Mississippi and landing at Bruinsburg, Mississippi. And that's not touted or well known, but it was the largest amphibious operation in history. We fought 5 battles in 17 days, marched 200 miles, won every battle, pushed Pemberton back into Vicksburg. 47 days later, we captured 30,000 men, took an entire army out of the field. It was devastating to the Confederacy. They never recovered from it. Yet it was a surrender, as I said earlier, in 24 hours. The roaring and the howling of the winds of war ended with the 5 battles that pushed Pemberton into Vicksburg, and then a quiet siege that did not garner headlines followed, and then a surrender negotiation. It lasted 24 hours, and it was all over. So what began with a roar ended with a whisper. didn't garner headlines, didn't garner attention. It wasn't the roar and the howl of artillery and shells and men screaming in a 3-day battle. So there are significant differences between the Battle of Gettysburg and the surrender at Vicksburg, which does not garner headlines in Vicksburg. They did in Gettysburg. Both were of great import to the cause and to secure freedom for the slaves and for millions of slaves at the end of the war, and for the ultimate victory of the Union in the war. But that's the difference between, as I view it, between Gettysburg and Vicksburg. I have thoroughly enjoyed my time with you, all of you here in the library. You're always welcome to join me. And in fact, I invite you to join me on my Fridays with Grant, with the Civil War Roundtable Congress, and other programs that I hold here in my library or in my parlor. But duty calls, and I must go attend to many things that the commanding general himself, General in Chief, must personally attend to. So until we meet again, I must bid you from the library. I'm General of the Army, Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant, bidding you a fond adieu.